Whoa,
We
we have
got
Scott
Scott.
Wu in the Temple of Technology. Welcome to the show, Scott.
There he is.
Yeah, man. Good to see you guys. How are you?
We're great. How are you?
Good, good, good. Busy couple days for us, but
Oh yeah, what's keeping you busy?
there's always so much stuff going on. I feel like there's new products that come out every week. There's new
Yep.
models that comes out every week, and then we obviously have a lot going on with Devin. So
Well, we appreciate you taking the time. Could you give us kind of just an
By the way,
overview?
real quick, Scott and I talked on the phone. I think it was maybe 5:30 or 6 Friday night, and he was like, "Yeah, everybody will be here until probably,
Oof.
what did you say? What's your normal? You guys have a pretty intense
we're
schedule."
usually still around past midnight. Yeah, yeah. So busy
Well,
schedules for
well,
us.
hopefully it's fun. You clearly haven't put yourself out of a job yet. But can you give us the update on kind of like where is Cognition now? Obviously, like massive launch, huge like going direct moment, great launch video, and then you kind of went into build mode, and we kind of haven't heard that much from the company. So can you give me an overview of where the products are, where the company is, and kind of set some ground rules for where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had our initial announcement about a year ago, actually, at this
Yeah.
point. And from then, a lot of it was basically just going through all the frictions of software engineering. The truth is, engineering is just so messy in the real world. If you think about what has to get done, obviously there's some pretty hard, logical problem solving type work that has to be done, but there's also a lot of practical stuff. And so, figuring out how to have a clean experience that slots in, figuring out how to work with all these enterprise customer code bases,
Hmm.
um, figuring out the capabilities and working with logging and documentation and tooling and things like that. And so, for a decent chunk of time, our main work actually was with larger enterprises.
Hmm.
And so we would work with a lot of these different groups, bigger tech companies, financial services, or things like that, and work with them on a lot of these bigger projects and more repetitive projects, and have Devin basically come in and speed up the job for a lot of this stuff. And then in December, we rolled out our general availability.
Hmm.
It's a self-serve plan where you can just put down a credit card and get started and plug in your code base and have Devin. And we were super excited about that, obviously, because it's really the chance for everyone to just get to try it out and see how it is. And it's been a fun last few months for us. It's been a lot of iteration and a lot of growth and so on. We've had users talking about how Devin's now quickly become the number one committer in their code base and so on. And so it's very cool to see. Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the decisions you made early on where to kind of put your AI efforts? Like, as I understand it, you didn't train a foundation model. You didn't do one
Yeah.
of the massive runs. You work with different model providers, but what considerations were made in the early stage, and are you still sticking with those, or have those evolved over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had, I would say two major bets that we really started the company with, and I would say the first one was, that reasoning and this whole RL paradigm was going to work.
Hmm.
And it was a pretty controversial thing, I think, around the end of 2023, because most of what the first generation of AI was, or the first generation of language models was more like imitation learning, right? It
Yep.
was basically like read all of the internet, read every Reddit post and talk like somebody on the internet, right? And
Yep.
and obviously, I mean, it was pretty incredible. We passed the Turing test. ChatGPT was a massive, and for a while, all of the work that was being done and all of the products that happened in particular verticals were much more in that style, which was basically, I'll call it text completion, basically, right?
Hmm.
And so, you had a product like that in marketing, right? You had a product like that for customer support, and similar things for code, where it's kind of like, here's the code so far, and just predict for me what line comes next, right? I think we had a strong view that. That this reasoning was really going to work and was going to enable a lot of new use cases. And then the other thing that we felt really strongly about was that the product experience was going to shift from this kind of more Q&A text completion style product to basically an agent,
Yeah.
and practically, I think what that means is, honestly, I think a lot of folks today still think of AI as kind of, a better Google, call it.
Yep.
Like, you have a question and you want to go search it up. You ask your AI and your AI has a better answer, which is big. Obviously, I mean, Google's not a small company, right?
Yeah.
But I think the actual vision that we're going towards with AI is actually even bigger than that, which is basically, your buddy that does your chores for you, right? And the obvious difference between those two is the ability to actually interact with the real world and do real tasks and so on, right? And so, there's a big difference between having a legal Q&A, for example, versus having a lawyer that can actually go submit things for you, that can go and um, um, interact with all these different surfaces. And the same is obviously the case in code, right? Where it's, this is how we build software, right? It's is you write code, you run the code, you see if it worked or not, you run the tests, you look at the documentation, you click around on the product yourself. And this is how we iterate and build, right? And so the ability to do that is a big step function difference.
Yeah. How do you think of getting Devin to go from sort of this reactive experience where you talk to Devin like you would a teammate or employee and say like, hey, can you help me sort of execute on this specific thing? It goes and does it, maybe comes back to get, feedback at different points too. I imagine long term you want this sort of proactive, sort of like high agency agent, and
Yeah.
how, I'm sure you guys are already experimenting with that kind of thing internally, but what are your plans along sort of that route?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so, the way that we kind of think about it is turning all the bricklayers into architects is almost, is how I would describe it. And, I think the really beautiful part of software engineering, I would say, is getting to do this core, problem solving and decision making around what do you want to build, right? It's like, let me understand the problem, let me understand what exactly is going on, and then let me figure out here's exactly the solution that I want to build for this, right? The thing is, you only spend about 10% of your time doing that. As a software engineer in practice, you probably spend about 90% of your time, dealing with your Kubernetes and fixing your unit tests and upgrading your thing to the new version and all of this other stuff, fixing these bugs that come up, right? And so a lot of it is the way I would kind of describe it is working with Devin um, as the implementer that allows you to be a really great architect, right? And so there's a lot of detail with that because naturally you have to be in all the same flows that humans use for software engineering if you want to do that, right? And so you have your logs on Datadog. So like, Devin's got to go look at those logs, right? You're talking about issues on Slack, so Devin's got to be in Slack, right? And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it is really kind of figuring out the workflow where it's very natural and very easy that as you're talking about this idea that you have or this new feature that you're trying to build or this bug that you're trying to fix or whatever, you're able to just tag Devin and just say, hey, at Devin, can you take a look at this and make this fix or do this thing? Yeah.
Yeah, talk about, specifically, I can imagine that Devin, because it's so embedded in these different workflows, uh, there's every single day we see, conversation on the timeline from somebody that says, I'm switching from, this code editor to that code editor or that code editor back to this code editor. How do you think about, sort of long-term moats and sort of lock-in as, you're building Devin for yourself, but then you're also, trying to build you're already $1 billion company. Eventually, I'm sure you have much, much bigger ambitions, but how do you think about sort of long-term moats and, around the sort of like software engineering agents?
Sure. Yeah, I think in the short and medium term, it's there's a lot of different experiences in code, and I think a lot of folks building kind of different product experience for different verticals or use cases within code. I think in the short and medium term, it's things are just changing so quickly that the natural thing is just whatever is able to help folks the most is what they're really excited to use, right? And I think there's just when the pace of development and also the pace of progress in AI is as high as it is, I think that's going to continue to be the case for a while. I think with that said, in the long term, I think these things naturally do kind of converge to a point, and there are a few particular pieces I would say that really kind of cause that, and one of the big ones that I'll just point out is there really is a lot of I guess in most spaces, we would call this personalization or something of that sort. But there's a lot of it in code, right? I mean, if you imagine you hire, the smartest software engineer in the world, and you get them to work on your code base day one, they're not going to know a lot of these little details about here's why we chose to do this architecture, here's what this function does and that function does, here's how you do this database migration or whatever it is, right? So, they have to learn all these things from the ground up, as opposed to somebody who's, just as smart, but has been at the company for, 10 years and built half the code by themselves. And, they wrote all of these files themselves and so on, right? Then, you get to a point where you really just understand the code base, you're making the same decisions and trade-offs and you're working with it very tightly. It's the kind of thing where, and we see this already where it's, as folks start using Devin more and more, one of the really cool things is, you can have one of your engineers ask Devin a question, and Devin is drawing on the knowledge that it has
Mm,
from all of the previous sessions it has with everyone on your team. Right.
that's
And
great.
it's able to learn all these things. And, if someone says, hey, we have to go do this version upgrade. And Devin might say, oh, yeah, I remember this. I actually just did one just like this, like last week, for this other part of you guys' code base. And so let's figure out this one and let's do this. Right. And so I think there's a lot of, that's kind of the shape, I think, of what we're going to see a lot in AI actually over the next couple of years, where, you know, this is a bit of a hot take, but I would say a lot of the problem solving is actually good enough already.
Mm.
A lot of the reasoning and the problem solving, I mean, AI has been shown to be capable of solving some pretty hard stuff. I think actually what we have left to do is a lot more so just understanding the detail and the complexity of the real world, right? And you think about all these tasks that we spend our time on, there's some amount of problem solving, but there's also a lot of just pulling in the relevant context and, understanding what are the common sense considerations you're working with. And that's a lot of what we spend our time working on with Devon's capabilities.
Can you talk a little bit about I have this take that we're almost in an AI winter for consumers, even though AI feels like it's moving so quickly. The
Yeah,
ChatGPT moment was so big because we passed the Turing test that for most average people, it's just Google search, as you mentioned. But over the last year, obviously, if you're following this stuff, there's been incredible breakthroughs. Inference cost has gone way down. Models have gotten bigger. Context windows have gotten way bigger. Have there been particular milestones in just AI research and development that have been more transformative to your business than others over the last year?
sure, sure. Yeah, I think at a high level, I think all the continued progress that we're seeing everywhere in AI actually is primarily due to essentially like reinforcement learning,
Mm-hmm.
RL. That's really working, and it is a very different paradigm, right? Where we're saying how in the past it was all just imitation learning, and it's get as much of the internet as you could possibly scrape up and just
Yep.
train on all of it, and hopefully you get something that knows a lot of stuff, right? Whereas this is kind of, this whole reinforcement learning paradigm is if you have a clear problem space where you can do the problem 100 times and this was right, this was wrong, this was right, this was wrong, it's a little bit more like AlphaGo,
Yep.
this self-play learning, but in a language model, right? And I think that's the biggest paradigm. And folks like OpenAI, Anthropic, and lots of Google, X, and so on, have shown a lot of real progress through this whole RL paradigm. To your point on consumer, I think that we'll probably see a resurgence actually in consumer over the next few months or so. And I think one of the big things I think that will actually flip that switch is like a really great consumer agent experience.
Sure.
There's
Yeah, we've talked
I
about
think
this.
there will be a
We haven't had the moment of just chatting with this sort of generalized agent that can just book you a flight in a hotel,
yeah
and it's like super seamless and like that.
Yep.
That's like what I feel like we've all been waiting
We've had
for.
that preview since Siri 1.0 back in a decade ago, and it still isn't here, and we're still waiting for it. But it feels like now it's actually just a couple months away.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
very
exactly.
exciting.
It's like I want to buy this pair of shoes and just go and look on all those websites and find which one delivers and which one is
Totally.
the best price for that and just go buy it for me, right? Like things like that where it's I think that'll be a pretty big moment for folks because you'll really
Yeah.
feel I think the difference of
How did you
How
yeah.
process the DeepSeek moment? Obviously, that took over the timeline earlier this year. It was very controversial in a bunch of ways. But what was your DeepSeek takeaway from that development?
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean I think at a high level it's a competitive world out there. I think there are a lot of really smart folks going after this problem, and it's the kind of thing where it's if you think about like what people even not just what was possible a year ago, but what even people even imagined could even work 1 year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. I mean, every year it's basically it's totally flipped, right? And,
Yep.
and now it's kind of like everyone in the space is talking about agents and the future of agents. When we were doing this like a year ago, no
Yeah.
one really even believed that agents were like a thing,
Yeah.
And I think that yeah, no, I mean it's the case I think everywhere in the stack, and we'll see. I mean there's the GPU layer, there's the hardware layer, there's the foundation models and so on. But I think all throughout the space, you have these really really smart folks and really smart teams that are going after the problems and basically pushing things forward. I think we're in a very high velocity period where it really does feel like every month in AI is like a year, and
Yep.
in a lot of these tech industries in the past. And so yeah.
how is AI adoption? What's been your takeaway from AI adoption within the Fortune 500, right? You see all these companies are spending billions of dollars on like Gen AI consulting contracts with Accenture. It feels like the consulting companies are probably doing more revenue from generative AI than like all of the software companies combined. Maybe ignore, OpenAI. Is it happening sort of bottoms up, like an engineer sort of comes to their team and they're like, it's they're in, not in San Francisco or New York, and they're saying, hey guys, I got this like guy named Devin. He's $500 a month, and like I think he can do,
Yeah.
our next 10 junior engineers can do. Or is it happening more so top down, where execs are super, kind of clued in and following the stuff, or both?
Like we need an AI strategy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the interesting thing with these times is there's a lot of both, and executives obviously and boards, for example. I mean, everyone is thinking about how do we get AI native and how do we make sure we're on top of this wave and how do we make sure we're ready to just accelerate as fast as possible and that we're ahead of the curve on this rather than being too late on it, right? Because obviously these things are moving so quickly. And then at the same time, it's like you have individual developers and folks like that who are just really excited to use these things. I mean, it's a lot of these painful tasks. I mean, if you're doing a full code base migration and your code base is 50,000 files and you got to do the same migration on every single one. I mean, it's not a fun task, and figuring out how to go quicker on those things so you can spend more time on the problems that you really care about and on figuring out what to build is really exciting for folks as well. But yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting time for us where you know it's bluntly, I mean, I think most of our waves in tech, there's always been kind of a hype phase, I'll call it, and also, a phase where basically, this adoption really comes in. And you saw the same thing with cloud, you saw the same thing with mobile, I mean, you saw the same thing with the internet itself, right? And yeah, I mean, I think it's an exciting one for us because I think with AI, I mean, I think I think if anything, I think the capabilities and I think what will be possible in AI are just getting exponentially better and better every year. But I think what I would say is, I think there's a lot of different there's a lot of different areas of generative AI where it seems very clear that it's like, this is getting better by the month. This is clearly going to work soon, and we want to be ahead of our time with this and get ready for this. And there are a few spaces I would say, and code is one of those where it's, this is actively working right now. I mean, if your team is not using any AI code tool, you are just heavily behind, right? And so it's kind of interesting, and I think we'll see each of these kind of come online at different points in time. And I think there are a few reasons why code is one of the first to really get there. But yeah, it's going to be an exciting few months for us.
What advice would you give the young Scott Wu, the younger version of you that's learning, that's just starting to learn to code,
Yeah.
and how do you sort of fast track to be kind of at the bleeding edge? Obviously, you can learn from the models themselves; they're great sort of instructors. But I think we went from this period where maybe a year ago everyone was like, "Oh, all the software engineers are cooked." They sort of like made their own replacement. To now, it's very clear that if you're a software engineer today, you have a massive
more leverage than
you
ever.
have more leverage than ever, and you have this massive sort of edge because even if eventually all this work goes from code to natural language, there's still this sort of it's possible to be on the bleeding edge. But how would you, if somebody's
Yeah.
sort of 22-year-old coming out of college today, what would your advice to them be?
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, I really think we're coming up on the golden age of software engineering here. And I think the main thing, as we're saying, I mean, I think it's always going to be up to us to decide what to build, obviously, right? And a lot of the core of computer science is, I would just say, is that question of understanding and deciding what to build. And so, if anything, I think the theory of computer science is going to be even more valuable. Understanding the layers of abstraction and knowing, the basic model of how a computer works and how to break down problems logically and how to reason with these systems is going to be, even more valuable. The other side of it, I would just say, is there's no shortage of demand for software. And one of the things that I think about all the time is like, I think today, even still, it feels so outlandish, but I think a couple of years ago, or a couple of years from now, this is going to be commonplace. Is single-use software, actually, right? And you can imagine a world where it's like, hey, I got to go look at these 10 LinkedIn profiles today, and I got to click through each of these, and I'm looking for this and that and whatever, and I got to go like research and get a bunch of data online, and then put that into an Excel sheet and run some numbers. A lot of these things are naturally code works just as well for these tasks, if not better, right? But obviously, it makes no sense at all to go hire some engineering team to go build you, this massive script that you're only going to run one time for this use case that you have today, right? But I think we will get to a point where basically you can just ask Devin, hey, here's the thing that we need to do. Let's just go build this real quick, right? And software will do that for you and will solve that problem for you. And
That's
I think
great.
there's just there's so many more products out there to build. That's the main thing that I always index on. It's crazy to think about, but I think it's like, you can imagine all these products out there that are niche products for 1,000 people or 100 people or even just for you. But they have the level of quality and the level of execution as um, the biggest products in the world today. YouTube or Instagram or whatever it is. So
Yeah, talk a little bit about, there's been a bunch of these sort of platforms, apps that have popped up, lovable.dev, I think bolt.new or I forget what it is, where, these sort of products that allow you to just generate an apps immediately, and they're showing this tremendous revenue growth. You guys seem to have focused on the potentially much harder problem of sort of building durable software products, but is there a world in the future where Devin goes more downstream and is actually, somebody comes on and creates their very first, application ever with Devin? Because, I see a lot of these companies pop up and I have no idea what their long-term roadmap is, but I can see why it's easy to generate a lot of revenue quickly to just generate apps or generate websites. But then, maybe that's not, it feels like potentially a good wedge, but not a super durable business necessarily, which is like, do I need to generate a new app every month? Like, probably not, but maybe,
yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think a lot of different product experiences in the space for sure. I think the way that we've always thought about it is, I kind of think of self-driving as the parallel where it's, there was first it was all manual and then eventually there's automatic shift, right? And then there was cruise control, there was auto park, and basically I guess the kind of the thing that I would point out here is, up until the point where it was true, full, it could do every single thing you wanted it to do, you still needed a driver's license for all of that middle era. Right. And there was a point at the end where it's kind of like, yeah, you could just sit in the back seat and just have the car do everything for you, right? And so I think we kind of have this similar paradigm, I'd say, in code, where it's maybe not so maybe not as much of a kind of like single step function switch, but you kind of have this gradual spectrum where,
yeah,
there are a lot of tasks, I think, where, yeah, like you said, building a cool website or something like that, where it's, yeah, you don't have to have any experience with code at all. And now you can just do this, right? And then I think there are a lot of these kind of like larger and more complex tasks, working on a big code base or figuring out things with your existing product or, building, as you're saying, like a lot of this really kind of these bigger projects where you still want to be an engineer and you still want to be really deeply technical, I think, to be able to make the most out of these AI coding tools and to use that. But with that said, I mean, I think that every month the capabilities change, right? And I think there will be a time, I think, where you're able to. It's just as easy as kind of looking at your product and talking in plain English about what you want, and that's it.
Do you like the innovator's dilemma framework? And do you think AI is more in the sustaining innovation camp or disruptive innovation camp? There's been a lot of debate about this, people comparing it to mobile, where the really large companies were actually the best positioned to take advantage of mobile. A lot of
Yeah.
people are saying Google, even though their product roadmap has been a little lumpy, they still have amazing talent, amazing hardware, amazing software, lots of talent to kind of reap the benefits of AI over the long term.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of interesting second order effects, and one of the maybe the most obvious ones to call out is basically a lot of these a lot of these switching costs, that exist, especially in these B2B businesses, are just going to go way down.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we could all think of these companies that they only really thrive today because it is so painful to switch off and to migrate off, right? And I think that's going to change a lot. I think on the other hand, I think a lot of as we're saying, this deep personalization and the ability to use data and to really build customer experiences for your users or your customers. I think that is going to um, only become more and more powerful. And so I think long story short is, I think that a lot of the existing great businesses are going to do very well in the age of AI. I think there will be in the neighborhood, I would say, of kind of like the 10 to 20 power law businesses of the new ones that come up from AI, and I mean, I think we already kind of see there's the foundation labs themselves, and then
Yep.
there's some of the, each of the big verticals of the application layer, right? There's code, there's law, there's, customer support, there's sales and so on, right? There's image and video. And I think there'll be kind of like, yeah, like a handful of businesses kind of from each of those categories. I think that really make it to the really massive outcomes. But yeah, I mean, as is always the case with these things, a lot of it is it's very hard to know in advance which ones will be the winners. I do think that um, yeah, I do think with the richness, I think of the space of AI, I think one of the big differences is there's just so much difference in technical execution. Where it's, you can in AI, you can be doing things that other teams or other products just cannot do, right?
Mm.
And I think that difference kind of means that I think really great, really talented new innovators will have a meaningful edge, and the best ones will be able to create some
What's your
meaningful.
take on the various walls? There's been this, deep learning's hitting a
Yeah.
wall. Scale might be not all you need. Now everyone's pretty scale pilled. Then we got in the reinforcement learning paradigm, as you mentioned. Are you worried about a data wall or an energy wall or just some sort of wall where we hit and we kind of stagnate and we're not seeing the breakthroughs and the acceleration that I think people are kind of expecting if you're following AI closely? Are you worried about any of those walls?
Yeah, I actually had the opposite take, which I think is in some ways optimistic, some ways pessimistic. But what
Okay.
I would say is kind of stagnation is actually the default.
Yeah.
It's by default, it's not the case that we're going to have this, the next thing. And I think we've kind of like we've felt it for so long at this point that it's like, yeah, the next model is going to be even better, and the next product is going to be even better, and the next GPU is going to be even better. But I think more what it speaks to actually is kind of the just yeah how amazing the kind of the flow of innovation is. It's like and just to give simple examples, I mean, it's like, GPT-3 wasn't just more of GPT-2. It was like it was a step function different, and there were a lot of things that had to be figured out. And GPT-4 wasn't just more of 3. It was like, and the same is true, I think, with reasoning. The same is true with the advancements that we're making in hardware. It's the same is true is with the advancements that we're making in the application there. So in some ways, it's kind of, I'm saying it's like there's no single kind of like force of nature that we get to rely on, where it's just like
Sure.
these things will get better all on their own. At the same time, it's truly remarkable, I think, that over the last few years, we haven't slowed down in figuring out the new innovations and the new categories that will get us there. So
What is one thing that you learned from Eric and Kareem from your sort of ramp days that you feel like you've really focused on making sure that you guys implement at Cognition?
yeah, yeah, it's I've known them a long time. I'm super super tight with both of them. They've given me a lot of incredible advice. I'll share one which I think was hilarious. Was, we were just getting started, and I called Eric and I was like, hey, we're starting this company. Obviously, like Ramp is incredible. I have so much respect for you and what you've built, and I just want to get your thoughts on, basically, yeah, what is the thing that I should really focus on today that I'm not thinking about right now? And Eric said, you know, take a lot of pictures.
That's
And
great.
I mean, it was actually great advice. It was funny because, I would talk to these people and all the, they would say, oh, you got to really nail in on hiring, and you got to really like figure out these, and all these things are also true, obviously. And Eric has helped with all these other things. But I found that funny that was the first, the day the company's founded. Don't forget to take those pictures. And it's like it's only been, I don't know, 15 months for us, right? But I am actually really grateful that we have those and that we did that. And I think there's a lot of things where it's just, just being in it and going through the experience, and knowing what you miss and what you don't miss. I think Eric and Kareem understand that better than anyone, honestly.
Well, thanks
That's
for
very
joining.
sweet.
It's 1:30. We won't take any more of your time. Where can people sign up, and who's kind of the wheelhouse client right now?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's Devin.ai, and anyone who's I'd say engineering teams all over the world. So we have teams that range from one or two person startups all the way to the biggest financial services firms in the world. And so yeah, we would love to hear folks' feedback on Devin as they're trying it out.
Awesome. Well,
Amazing.
thanks for
Thanks for
joining.
coming on, Scott.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Have a good one.
Have a good one.
Okay.